Second player press start.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Second Player Press Start. My name is James and I'm joined by my friend and guy on the couch.
Darren. That's me.
And today we're here to talk about the latest Assassin's Creed game, Assassin's Creed Origins.
Origins.
This is another Assassin's Creed game.
Yes. Yes, it is.
But from what I can tell, Darren played, what was it, maybe...
Just over an hour?
Just over an hour of the start of the game. And it seems like, while some things are kind of Assassin's Creed-ish, it seems like they're trying some new stuff.
Yeah, you'd be better to talk about the new differences than I would, simply because I've only played the first one way back. I don't even know when that was. Early 2000s?
Yeah, I guess this is the 10th...
Holy, I had no idea.
10th major installment of the Assassin's Creed series.
Wow.
The one before this was Assassin's Creed Syndicate. That was kind of like the Victorian London... I think I own it, but I don't think I've played it.
Right.
And then the one before that was Unity, which I played a little bit of, but I think it got kind of panned due to some of its technical issues.
Okay.
I think the only Assassin's Creed game that I've really finished was the very first one. I think beyond that, the only other Assassin's Creed game that I enjoyed was Black Flag, which was the pirate
one. Yeah.
Pirate one.
I remember watching you play some of that a while back now.
Yeah. What's kind of your history with this series?
Well, if I remember correctly, it was you that was like, hey, you should try the first one because it's kind of neat. And then I got it on Steam, on PC, and that would have been a long time ago now. I played a considerable amount of it, but to be honest, I just kind of got bored. I found out maybe through you and like some reading and stuff online, but the first one, people did talk about there being a lot of sameness to the stuff that you were doing. So if you didn't have a lot of fun interacting with the world around you and were just kind of like doing a quest after quest kind of thing, then you were doing a lot of the same stuff over and over and over again. So,
yeah, it was a very repetitive game. I think the thing that kind of strung me along was the whole Animus concept, which, if you've never played an Assassin's Creed game before, the premise is you're kind of entering a virtual simulation of usually it's tied to someone's like
ancestors or something.
Yeah. So the first game had this cool thing where after a few missions you would jump kind of into the present day or future time period where you've been hooked up to this machine.
Sure.
And there was some kind of intrigue there as far as like why you were hooked up to the machine.
Right.
You were kind of held prisoner and almost forced to kind of step back.
I remember that.
Into your history. And I think that premise is what kind of kept me playing the first game.
Right.
Because you're right, that first game was a lot of kind of doing the same thing over and over. It seems as the series has progressed, that kind of Animus concept is... almost non-existent.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, if I didn't know anything about Assassin's Creed, and this is my first entry point, the fact that it's called Origins, I'm really surprised by the lack of any connecting point narratively to any of this stuff. There's no talk about the Animus. There's that one, you hit your synchronize button when you're at like a tall point. and the fact that you can hit the up button and use your animus, but it doesn't explain any of that in this game. It doesn't touch anything at all, which I found really surprising. I don't mind it being part of a franchise and having the same mechanisms and the same playstyle as games before in just a different space, but to not address that at all seemed like really lacking to me.
Yeah, I mean, because you are seeing this kind of overlay of like, there's a button you can hit that will kind of reveal nearby loot.
Sure.
So in the context of you stepping in this virtual world, that kind of makes sense.
Right.
But without any context of that kind of animus virtual world computer thing, it doesn't quite make sense.
Yeah.
Unless there is a component later on in the game.
Sure.
But they definitely haven't revealed that right up front.
Yeah, I mean, we played for, like we talked about, over an hour, and there was a few weird cutscenes, and that was about it. And then you're just kind of dropped in this world, and you're trying to, like, you're learning about the setting at the same time that you're exploring the setting, at the same time you're learning about the mechanisms. So maybe it was an effort to not overwhelm the player, but it does seem to me that from maybe the perspective of the developer, but they're just like, look, this is the 10th Assassin's Creed game and you know what you're going to get, so we're just going to put it in a different place and give you the thumbs up and just kind of explore the world. And I don't know, like, to me, I know from, like, you know, comic book reading or the Marvel Cinematic Universe or whatever, there's all these franchises out there that there's these continual narratives, and the writers, the creators are always concerned about bringing new people in and how can they give them a good experience while also keeping the experience solid for the people that have been there for the long game, right? And I feel that this, so far, sure, it's an open world game, but this isn't giving me anything different than any other open world game that is very explicit about the story it's telling. And this one's just like, okay, you're this dude and there's some bad dudes and you have some friends and it's in Egypt, ancient Egypt. I don't know, that's not enough for me to be like super interested in it. Mechanically, like I was enjoying the game. There's some interesting stuff. I was enjoying the play of the game, but there's very little in the core narrative or the character like driven part of it that gave me any reason to keep playing.
Yeah, and I'm finding that kind of in a lot of these Ubisoft games. Like they're almost becoming kind of like the same game. Like if I compare this with I recently played Ghost Recon Wildlands, and they have a mechanic in that game where you can fly a drone and you can mark your targets, and then sure enough in this Assassin's Creed game, instead of a drone it's an eagle,
right,
that you can kind of fly and mark your targets.
Sure.
And even some of the UI stuff, it's Ubisoft has kind of almost like branded their games in a way, because everything, even kind of the font styling and the way the map's kind of handled, it's all kind of becoming the same kind of game, like these open worlds, you know, a random bunch of little plots on a map and you kind of pick away at them.
Right.
I don't know, what's kind of your thoughts? Like, I've played quite a few of Ubisoft's games in the past few years.
Sure.
Maybe I'm a bit more sensitive to it, but...
Well, like I said, when I look at the gameplay of it, there's some good quality there. I was enjoying traversing the map. I was enjoying looking at all the things that were in the game, all the content, all the animals, the flora and the fauna and the people, and it's presented as an open world, and that's what I got out of it. Everybody has their own little story, and there's little points everywhere along the way that you can jump in and out and have an adventure. And but there's no reason, other than the fact this is in ancient Egypt, there's nothing about this that says, like, this character matters to me, or this mission, or the purpose of this character is significant to me, or it has any importance to me whatsoever. It's just, hey, come play in the playground, and that's pretty much it. So that means that at any point I could pick it up if I want to play for 5, 10, 15 minutes, and then drop it and maybe never come back to it again, because there's nothing holding me to it.
Yeah.
It's just a fun toy.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah, it's just kind of that, like you said, an open world sandbox of just kind of playing, which is something like Grand Theft Auto's done really well in the past, of kind of creating a world where you don't have to, follow the missions. You can have this kind of emergent gameplay of, I think even when you were playing, it was like you were wandering down different paths, and there was, a little hole in the ground, and you kind of went into this tomb and you found some stuff, right?
Sure.
I think the difference between like this and Grand Theft Auto is that, like, Grand Theft Auto has that kind of emergent stuff, but like the core story motivates you enough to kind of get through all the missions.
Right, to take the next step.
Yeah.
Yeah, in this there was an option at one point for me to do up to 4 different quests at any given time in any order. The only reason I chose not to do one is because it was like a higher level than I was at, suggested level. But I have a feeling from, just from looking at the narrative, so that higher level one was the story quest. But there was no incentive for me to go do it, other than the fact it was just another checkbox on my to-do list. So I could have screwed around and gone to all these interesting tombs. Like, coming from being a Tomb Raider fan, I'm like, okay, well, I found this interesting tomb and I looted some cool stuff, and that's where I found this rare item. So maybe instead of going to kill this guy for some reason because he's bad, maybe I'll just go find some other tombs, because that was fun. And I could play it that way. This game gives me the opportunity to play it that way. But like I said, if I get bored of doing the tomb thing, or I get bored of like looking at the scenery or whatever, then what is it that's drawing me back into the game to make a decision to move forward? And I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, I mean, like, aesthetically, I thought it was like really, it looked really cool.
Agreed, yeah.
I was kind of blown away when you first kind of enter the city and it kind of pulls back. And like, you get the sense of scale and like how large this place is. And even when the camera kind of zooms back in, the fact that you can kind of look in any direction and say, I might want to go over there and just kind of see what's over there. You can do that. Sure. Yeah, I thought the lighting was really neat.
Yeah.
Like, visually, I thought it was like really well done.
Yeah, for sure. In terms of the visuals and the sense of place and the setting, I think everything was handled well. I think it was the world was very appealing. It was very interesting. There was a lot of like small details and nuance to the people and the clothes and the plants and the animals and all that kind of thing. I think the world was built really well, really well. And it made that part of it interesting. So if I was presented with the game, this is just an open world version of ancient Egypt, and you can go and do whatever you want, then that can still be a game. Like, maybe, it crosses that line into toy like we talked about with some other things, but that's still something that you can sell, that people are interested in. To say that this is an Assassin's Creed game because you can also assassinate people, and that's like that one step in that direction, minus talking about anything to do with Animus or why you're there or anything in the first place. Like, okay, so then why is this part of this franchise then? Like, what makes this so significant that it's not just this sandbox? And I still don't know. From what's been presented so far, I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah, one of the newer things it seems like they've kind of leaned into, it's almost like a light RPG, right? Which I think I haven't really seen. Perhaps it was in the last game, but I haven't seen until now. Like the fact that when you're hitting guys or attacking guys, there's numbers popping off of them.
Yeah.
And even like some of the weapons you grabbed were, color coded purple for rare or whatever, right? Like a lot of RPG stuff. I'm pretty sure they've had like the talent tree upgrade system in past games, and I know for sure they've had it in some of their other games too. Like that's definitely a system that they've used in other games. How did you feel about some of those kind of light RPG mechanics kind of coming into an Assassin's Creed game?
Well, I think progression in general, in any capacity, is something that holds the player to the game, right? Because if something that you're doing changes the world some way, you feel like the decisions you're making are making a difference, right? You're affecting something. And I think that's really important. I think there's ways that you can do that, though, without it feeling so, I don't know, so gamey, I guess. Like the fact that every time I shot a gazelle to get leather and I got XP points and it showed damage markers, I'm like, this is really bringing it out, in my opinion, of what this open world has already presented up to this point. And I felt like there was a big dissonance there between this delightful, beautiful open world system and then adding on all these layers that it doesn't matter to me if I hit the deer and I do 138 points of damage instead of 66. Like I can tell by looking at where I shot the deer if it was a headshot and it dies, or if I hit it in the leg and it runs away. Like I don't need to know the numbers to get value out of it. And I don't need to see my like XP bar tick up either. Because that's not the part of the game that I'm interested in. If that's what I wanted to do, then this is a game, I guess you could grind, right? You could go to a place with a lot of animals and just murder things and get a little bit of XP, or just kill everybody in the street or something. I don't know if that, I never tried killing quote unquote innocent people. Maybe you get XP from that. I don't know. But it just seems counter to some of what else is going on in the game.
Yeah, it's even funny, like once you finish a quest, like these big bright yellow text pops up on the screen.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it seems kind of out of place. I mean, I guess again you could maybe tie it to this Animus thing, but when it's so far removed, it kind of stands out.
Yeah, very much so. There was a point where I was talking to, it was a kid that I found in one of the tombs, and I was trying to get him out of there and then fight some hyenas because they were going to hurt him or whatever. And I'm talking with the kid and we're having a conversation post me finishing off these hyenas. But as that's happening, there's these big like yellow bars and explosions and leveling up and all, and I can't even hear what the conversation is anymore. So it's completely dislocated me from the interesting part of the story that I'm trying to engage with, and instead showing me numbers and figures that I really couldn't care any less about. And for what? Just for me to engage more with it because now I know that I've got a new ability or that I can unlock a new ability. I don't understand that. I think there's ways to do that much more subtly where you'd still notice it, but it doesn't have to overwhelm the world that they're building, which to me seems like the best part of this game.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, those RPG elements seem new, and I guess, like, in some ways, like, if you like kind of grinding and leveling up, I think that's a draw. I mean, it still keeps that flavor of Assassin's Creed as far as like the thing that initially drew me into that game was kind of that parkour, right?
Yeah.
The fact that you can kind of run and jump and leap. There didn't seem to be as much of that.
Agreed.
Like I remember in the first game, it was a lot of like kind of staying up really high and kind of creeping along the rooftops.
Yeah, part of it I think is because the cities were bigger, if I remember correctly, at least from the first game. And when you did traverse through kind of the more suburban areas, there was still a fair amount of buildings and stuff. In this, a lot of the traversal was over rocks.
Yeah.
So sure, you're climbing up rocks instead of climbing up buildings, but it does give a different feel because at least there's a few points where I was really trying to be stealthy and I just failed miserably. But I'm not sure if that's because I couldn't figure out how to do a silent takedown from the bush, because I was apparently taught it in the game, but we couldn't figure out how to do it after the fact. So I guess the point though is that there's some of these elements where you can be stealthy, but most of them had nothing to do with like vertical traversal.
Yeah.
It was almost all about hiding in a bush on the same level, or like maybe trying to flank or something, or there was some whistle option that wasn't necessarily connected to my camel, which my camel was awesome, but I don't know if that had to do with stealthy and like tricking people or whatnot, because that was never introduced. And I was always afraid that if I hit the whistle button that, I would attract unwanted attention. So I just never tried it. But
yeah, the other thing that, I mean, maybe it's, we're still early enough on that it hasn't kind of got to this, but one thing I liked about the old games was that sense of kind of like blending into a crowd.
Right, I do remember that, yeah.
Like there was no sense of like doing a kill and then kind of swiftly
vanishing
into the crowd and kind of being masked by that.
Right. I do remember.
This seems a bit more like isolated, like, there's a cave full of bad guys and you kind of have to be stealthy within that space versus kind of a living, breathing world where people are moving about. Again, who knows, maybe once you visit another town that's maybe a bit more developed, maybe there's it's more full of people.
Sure, but wouldn't that element though be something that you want to forefront in an Assassin's Creed game, right?
Yeah.
My opinion, right? So if we've played an hour in and we still haven't hit some of those core things that are like, yes, this is what I want from an Assassin's Creed game, then why haven't we? Like, what's stopping them from giving us those experiences which we want out of the game, instead just like layering it or pushing it later? I maybe looked at one of the skills about like a hidden blade kill or something like that. Does that mean that until I level up to a certain amount that I can't even do those awesome stealth kills that are supposed to be like the franchise is known for?
Yeah,
if that's the
like
case,
a hallmark of the series.
Yeah,
right?
If that's the case, I feel like I'm a lesser character, a lesser avatar in the game until I reach the level where now I'm an awesome assassin.
Right. And from my perspective, it seems like you were kind of struggling a bit with the combat as far as like wanting to pull off certain moves at certain times. Even some of the like to dismount your camel, you had to hold a button versus
just hopping
off. Did you find? I mean, I know you're not usually a PS4 controller guy, but did you find yourself kind of battling with the controls a bit?
That's a really good question. I feel like from the onset, I'm introduced to a menu system where even though I have a controller that can click through things because it's like left, right, up, down controller, I'm presented with using my control stick as a mouse cursor, which already I'm like, well, this isn't the best form of interaction with this device. I mean, I didn't try using the pad on it. Maybe that would have worked. I didn't try it.
Right. The little touchpad.
I didn't even think of that. But to have like 4 buttons on the left of the screen that I can interact with if I had pressed up and down to go through the 4 options. But instead I have to move a cursor from the middle of the screen over to the left side of the screen and then hover. Oh, I went too far up. I have to bring it back just gently down to touch the button. It was just ridiculous in my opinion. So then when you look at some of the other controls, you're like, okay, so traversing over the rocks, I can hold my parkour button and just like climb and jump all over, and that's great. But in some other areas, I'm like, okay, so it just seemed really unintuitive to fight people. Like I would have loved to, in ways I've seen in countless brawler style games, going back even to the PS1, where I could hold like a bumper button or a trigger button, and that would automatically orient me to my enemy, right? So then I could attack with my other keys. But in this one, I had to toggle a button to, instead of hold a button, to attach to an enemy. And then I had different attacks, and each of those attacks were different based on the weapon I was using. So every time I found a new weapon in the game, they were like, hey, here's how you equip this weapon, or equip this new weapon now, or whatever. I'd have to relearn how to use that weapon every time. So every time I got into a new combat, I was relearning how to use not necessarily the combat system, but because the weapon was used so differently. So there's some depth there, but because of how quickly I had to move through those different weapons, just in the way the game presented it to me, I guess I didn't have to upgrade the new weapon, but the tutorial told me to. It meant that I had to learn so many things instead of just getting proficient with the sword to start with. And then, okay, now I know that if I switch to this heavier weapon, it's going to attack in this way, and I can try that for a bit. I also found in speaking of some of the controls, the idea of, like you said, holding a button versus tapping a button to do a thing. And when I was dismounting the camel, I pressed circle, but I had to hold it in order to get off the camel. My assumption is maybe they didn't want people to accidentally tap it and hop off at an inopportune moment, but that seemed pretty unlikely, because like if I'm moving with the camel, I'm not just going to be tapping all these other buttons. So I couldn't figure that out, and it made it really unintuitive sometimes. Sometimes I wanted to do a thing and I hit the button. I might have even hit the right button, but I didn't hold the button, so I didn't get the outcome that I wanted. There was also the fact that when you're on the camel, there's a few buttons you can hold to just go to your locations, and then it just follows the road. But if that's the case, then like, why do I have to hold the button to dismount? Can I just tap it or move out of the way? It just seemed really, I don't know. It's not janky because the controls worked, right? It's not like I did the thing that I was supposed to do and I was in the wrong place or something and it was fiddly, like in some of the other games we've talked about, State of Decay or things like that. It was more that the way they did the buttons seemed unnecessary.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe after like a few hours, you might get the hang of it.
Sure.
But, like, is there really a reason, like you said, to hold the button versus tapping it?
Right.
I mean, yeah, there could be an argument whether, you tap it accidentally and you fall off. But, I mean, there's also ways of like, well, if the camel is at a complete stop and you tap it, then that's,
right.
A sign that probably the player wants to leave.
It triggers a different event in the game rather than you're running at full tilt and you tap it accidentally and you just stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get a chance to play it. I definitely think I will give it a shot. I'm kind of interested to see kind of how the game plays. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I did notice you were kind of struggling a little bit with the controller. And there were a few things that, one being that camel, that kind of led me to believe, okay, maybe this isn't user error, but just the way it was designed just seems a bit cumbersome.
Right.
The whole, like, moving the cursor like a mouse thing, I think it's kind of a recent trend in games on console.
You mentioned that.
I know Destiny was, I think, the first game to do it. So I don't know if it's kind of like a bandwagon thing of like popular game X did it, so we'll kind of use it.
just to me it seems way more cumbersome. Like there's always that discussion, well, you shouldn't be playing shooters with a controller. Like why would you play a PC game with an Xbox controller? And I think like that's the dumbest argument ever. Like you can use whatever controller you like, but the purpose of using a different controller has to do with usability and comfort and so many other valuable things, not because I want a particular experience with the look on the screen.
Yeah.
That just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, like you said, the fact that you slowly had to move this cursor to the left edge of the screen when you probably could have pressed up or down
Yeah.
in a split second and would have been where you needed it
Sure.
to go.
Sure.
What else?
There was speaking of like some of the narrative flow, but there seemed to be a lot of transition moments in this game where it would like in some of the opening sequences, like we start loading the game with the Animus thing, and then we go to the title screen, and then we load the game up, and then there's like a shot with our main character with some guy on the ground, and they're arguing, and then he kills him, and then the next thing we're like outside with the bodyguard, and that's a means to show me how to do the fight sequence, and then we fall through like, I don't know, the ground breaks from under us or something like that, and we fall through, and now I'm shown another fight sequence part, whereas like you could have shown some of this in narrative and then moved to a moment where the fight sequence was more fluid, but instead it's all these weird choppy cuts and like I don't know what's going on, and there's just so much things changing without any context, and by the time you get to the end of it, then you're kind of getting towards where the narrative actually picks up, and then it just drops you in this tomb and you're completely solo and there's no more story anymore. And it's just like, okay, use the Animus to find the point to get out. And it was that whole opening, probably 10-15 minutes, was just so weird and like choppy, and I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, it was really fragmented, like you said. When you compare it to something like God of War that, had such a seamless transition from cinematic to gameplay, this just felt really dated, and like, you would stop for a split second for it to load between kind of, gameplay to cutscene.
Right.
It's if you're gonna do a cutscene, make it count. And then when we get to the gameplay portion, like, at least give me a few minutes.
Sure, absolutely.
Because even like the in between, like you would play for, I think there was one instance where you had to shoot 2 arrows at at 2
the dummies,
the dummy, the target practice, which took you 10 seconds, and then it would jarringly cut to another cutscene. Just really fragmented, and I don't know if that could be solved with maybe if you were playing on PC with a good fast solid state drive, maybe that load would be a little.
Well, I mean, I would go back to first principles and say, do they even need to make a load there at all? Like, is it really, when you have this open world game that once we are in the world, we didn't experience that at all. It was just the way that they were presenting it to us in the moment that they felt, for whatever reason, we need to transition to something else now. And I feel like all those things could have been done with even just a few visual or text-based points on the screen to just be like, okay, now this is how we shoot the arrow. And then like we could just stay in that space because it was already part of the open world. I didn't understand why we needed to transition at all.
Yeah, even if you look at something as old as Half-Life, right? The fact that everything kind of stays within that perspective. And,
that's right, yeah.
It doesn't take you out of the game. My thought is maybe because that game is just so huge, you have your cinematics team and then your gameplay team. And it's like, cinematic needs to be inserted here. And that's kind of how it very much felt.
Right. kind of like the old FMV sequences in
Yeah.
PlayStation 1 and stuff like that.
Yeah. Which is, yeah, it's unfortunate. Maybe that's something they can improve on.
Well, like that opening sequence with the fight between the guy and the, like he threw his throwing knife at him and it got stuck in the mask and all that kind of thing. That was kind of an intense sequence, but because we had no context for it, all we knew is that these two guys were yelling at each other and one didn't like the other and then he killed them. But I didn't even know that one of those, honestly, I didn't even know that one of those was one of like the character that I would be playing at that point because I was given no context for it. But that was a, visually well done sequence, but I'm sure like if you just look at, okay, what do we need to do in the first 15 minutes of the game? What information do we need to convey? And what is the best way to get there? And what is the best way to bring in some of the tutorial of the basic controls to the player? I think what we got compared to what we've seen done by so many games before it, this was really poor.
Yeah.
This was really poor.
Yeah, unfortunate.
That said, the open world stuff, like I said before, the game part of it there was still really good. It was fun. It was interesting. It was engaging. But if I wasn't hooked on that play, or if I stopped being hooked on that play for any reason, there was nothing bringing me back to the game. And that goes to the character and the narrative. Yeah, I guess it's unfortunate because there's tons of work in this game. There's tons of content. The fact that when we zoomed out of the map, we're only seeing a small portion in this little town where we're from, and it's going to get way bigger than that, guaranteed. But am I ever going to get to that? Probably not. Am I ever going to see the rest of the world? Probably not. I mean, if I owned it, maybe little by little I'd plug through things here and there, but there'd probably be games that really grabbed me that would come along and totally steal this place from me. So
Yeah, I mean, I think like gaming as a whole, like there's some pretty stiff competition, like for your attention or for your time, and it's crazy that a AAA game of this kind of size and budget is failing to kind of hit certain marks that even like lesser known smaller games are kind of nailing.
mm-hmm.
And who knows, maybe they've studied and play tested that, people aren't really into narrative driven games as much as they, were in the past.
Right.
I know I can speak for myself, like narrative in games is what I go to for games.
Right.
Some of my favorite games are pretty much just interactive movies, right?
Right.
I think there needs to be a reason to play a game, and story is a very effective way of doing that, right? You get a good gripping story, that'll keep you playing to kind of see how it pans out.
Sure.
And I think this game is severely lacking that.
Yeah, and I think what frustrates me is that story doesn't have to be the only thing that draws you into a game. There's lots of games that are completely based on the mechanisms of play, right? And the strategy or whatever. And because this world is such a proficient open world in a setting that we haven't really seen before, that could be enough for this. But then if that is your game, know the core of what you're doing and why you're doing it. And then you can get rid of some of these other things that are actually just making this, what I want to get to, worse. Because it's mixing me up and I don't know why I'm doing the thing that I'm doing. There's ways to introduce me to the core game, which if it is the sandbox, could be way better than it was.
Yeah, I think even like the sandbox looks interesting, but even when I compare it to like the latest Far Cry, for instance, the one thing that I liked about that game was even if you were roaming around, it seemed like interesting things were kind of happening all the time.
Okay.
I didn't really get the sense from this game, like when you were kind of traversing from point A to point B, there really wasn't much kind of happening.
Right.
Again, I don't know if that changes later on in the game. But you would almost want to paint that right at the beginning.
Yeah, totally. Because even in the Far Cry you're talking about, that was the one in like the wilderness, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's not a good like not Pacific Northwest, but like Midwest forest and that kind of thing. Is that the one? Yeah. So it's not even that it was more populated with people per se. It was just stuff was still happening.
For sure.
Because I was going to say, yeah, but this one, you know, it was older, so there wasn't as much people around and stuff. But I'm like, wait, the Far Cry you're talking about was not like that either.
Yeah. I think there could have been opportunity to... And again, I don't know if this is just early on in the game, but you kind of want to show...
Best foot forward.
And I'm trying to give it the benefit of the doubt, but like, how far do you have to go into a game to really know this is what this is all about, right?
Yeah. And there's been games we've played so far that run the gamut of indie through AAA, and we know within 30 minutes, even 10 minutes in some games, where it's like, okay, this is what it is, and I know right now if I'm on board for that. And if we had watched a trailer and that expectation was set in the trailer even, so that now you know before you even drop your money, and you don't feel like you've been taken advantage of, right? And this is one of the few games that we've played so far that I didn't watch a trailer for, so I can't make that comparison. But it would be a real shame if the trailer presented this in a way where I felt like I was totally ripped off.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Like, I can see myself maybe playing this for a few hours and never revisiting it unless something really grabbed a hold of me past what you've kind of already done. But
right.
If this game is just kind of more of what you've already done, I think like if I got to a second city and it was kind of more of the same, then I think that would be a definite like, yeah, I can't do this for like 60 plus hours.
Right.
That's just not the type of gamer that I am, but
sure.
Maybe this game isn't targeted towards the type of player that I am, but
sure.
For some reason I keep buying these Ubisoft games, even though they're slowly kind of all becoming the same game, but just kind of set
convergence
in different settings. But did you have any other things to add beyond?
I think I touched everything. I really liked riding the camel. The camel animations were a little strange to me. They seemed off. I don't know camels very well, but it just seemed like, I don't know if that's how this animal moves per se, but it was fun to have a camel and like it make noises and it bounce while you're moving, and being able to jump from high cliffs and stuff was pretty neat. But that's the only other thing I have to say.
And there was heavy blunts.
Yes, heavy blunts, and dank bud.
Which was really weird. I mean, I kind of like the jankiness in games sometimes. I find that kind of fun. Endearing. I remember even in Black Flag, there were some pretty hilarious bugs that I ran into of, guys doing a weird animation in the middle of the street. Like it kind of triggered something. And Ubisoft is kind of known for their open world games being a little janky, but I think most open world games kind of have that, right? Yeah, I mean, you're putting in a lot of content. A lot of it, in some capacity, has to be procedural, because I'm not sure if you could fully, from top to bottom, design something that big, like by hand, manually. I just don't think that you'd have the capacity for it. I think you have to
your AI has to manage multiple animations and randomize it amongst all your NPCs, and then your animals and your weather systems and all that kind of stuff. It all has to be systems. So there's going to be some times where the interactions kind of interact in strange ways that were unexpected, and maybe some NPC's walking and bumps into something else that normally it wouldn't, and it shoots off some weird bug. So yeah, I can see that.
All right.
But I mean, this is the 10th one, right? This is
Yeah.
the 10th Assassin's Creed. And I don't know, like, maybe at this point, like, it's so far out of the scope of what I expect from an Assassin's Creed game that I don't know.
So I know they've announced the next one, which I think is coming out later this year,
Wow.
because this was last year's game.
So it's like FIFA.
Yeah. I mean, they did take a little break, but they were pumping these out every year,
Wow.
which they would have to, right? Because if this is the 10th one.
Yeah, I don't know when the first one dropped, but yeah.
And the next game, from what I've seen of it, kind of it's like set kind of in like the Roman Empire kind of setting. Or am I getting it confused?
It's possible, because that would fit in with this one in terms of like because this one was 49 before the Common Era BCE.
Yeah.
So that's, the Roman Empire comes in, and I could see that as a transition for sure.
But I mean, is that game just going to be this with a different kind of paint?
Different skin.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, where can they go with this series? I don't know what else is really left to explore. Like, I really would have liked to see kind of that Animus concept been brought back, but
Well, yeah, it's hard for me to answer because I don't know what I played the first one, so I don't know what the other 8 games were like. I mean, at that point, like even in a movie franchise, when you go on that long, you're like, we do what Tomb Raider does, and we completely reboot, and we like take some of the core concepts and move forward with those, or we start changing like big things in the game, right? And the steps we take are bigger and bolder, and we're holding to like the heart of it, but the look and the feel and the play is totally different. And I could see that happening for this. I don't think, like, if they're running on the same engine, and this is the same thing that's been there just with small improvements to the engine year over year over year, then maybe it's not costing as much as a AAA game is to produce something like this. But even in like the setting and the trees and the animals and stuff, like I'm sure there has to be different models from what we've seen in other versions of Assassin's Creed, because it's in a different place. So if they're trying to hold to being realistic with the location, then I'm sure they have to redesign those assets.
yeah.
And that's not cheap.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say.
And I guess really if you want a different style Assassin's Creed game, you just pick one of their other
one
games,
of the ones that's already
right?
done, yeah.
Because I was about to say, like, I would like to see them maybe do like a sci-fi take or like a more future.
Right.
But then they have Watch Dogs, which is a third-person open
Near
world
future, yeah.
game that, again, it's this open world and you pick points in a map and
Yeah. Or if the Far Cry franchise, very similar.
you want a
again.
first-person take on it, then there's Far Cry. If you, yeah,
Yeah, I think what differentiates these games, or what gives them the ability to move forward so far, has been their setting. That we're just going to pick up what we've done before, and now it's going to be in the Victorian era. Now it's going to be in Egypt. Now it's going to be Roman centurions or whatever.
yeah,
Is that enough to propel it? No, I don't think without like a compelling narrative, because unless you're really into the Victorian era, really into Egypt, like there's not a gameplay reason to play in those eras without it just being a novelty, right? Like, now I'm full of soot and now I'm full of sand. Like, that's the difference, right? And I don't think that's enough to build a huge thing out of. I don't think it's sustainable. Like, I'm surprised they've come this far and this is what I'm playing right now.
Unless they just have their core fan base that likes these games, and
Yeah, like we talked about with Call of Duty.
Yeah.
Right?
they're they're not necessarily talking to guys like you and me who maybe have dabbled in the past, but this is really the first time
Right.
that we've played this in a while. Maybe it's, those 1 million people that buy this every year, and that's enough for them.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
that kind of keeps the lights on in the office, and
Yeah, it's just that cycle.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, that's how, EA works with its sports and its racing and all that kind of, it's just that cycle, right?
Yeah.
New content year over year.
yeah, I mean, I personally would like to see new game ideas from bigger studios, but I understand the risk
Sure.
of this is a business too, right?
Yeah.
They have to kind of assess, well, this is a routine seller that will sell X amount of units, and
Right.
if we invest into something new, that's a risky endeavor that may not pay off.
May not pay off. Yeah.
So, I guess overall, we're kind of meh
Yeah.
about the game. Like I said, I think I'll spend a little bit of time with it. I don't think it's going to hold my interest, but I hate saying this every review, but it seems like if you like these type of games, then this will be the one for you. But
Right.
I guess that's just kind of the time and age we live in.
Yeah, there's just so much content, right?
Yeah. So, maybe we'll look at some games not from Ubisoft in the future, because I don't think they're going to be planning on doing anything too different.
Right. Right.
So with that said, I think that'll wrap up today's episode of Second Player Press Start. As always, you can subscribe to the podcast or visit our YouTube channel. All of that information is on our website at secondplayerpressstart.com.
Yeah, and that's second with a 2, number 2 ND, secondplayerpressstart.com.
As always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Second Player Press Start. Say goodnight, Darren.
Good night, James.